What's up, guys, and thank you for tuning in. Today we're going to go over the process of rebuilding a set of front forks for a 2000 CR500. Alright guys, let's talk about what we're going to need to complete our fork rebuild here. First and foremost, you need a good high quality fork oil. I've been using the Bel-Ray products for a long time. They've always done me really well. This is probably my go-to oil. Now there are other companies out there that make really good fork oil. It's all preference really. Second thing you're going to need is a set of fork and dust seals. These are a set from All Balls. I have some guys that complain about the All Ball stuff. I have other guys that love it. For me, the All Ball stuff has always done me right. Last but not least, you're going to need a set of bushings. A lot of guys tend to overlook these bushings, but the bushings are actually really important. And what they do is they keep the tolerance between your inner and outer tube. And if you have a set of worn out bushings, more than likely it's going to cause your new seals to go out prematurely. So it's worth the investment to go ahead and just get yourself a new set of bushings when doing this job. Let's talk a little bit about the tools that we're going to use today to complete our job. As you can see, I have 3 tools here that I would say are specialty tools. That would be this one, and this one. Out of these 3 tools, only one of them is an absolute must, and that is this one right here, the fork seal driver. You will need a fork seal driver of some sort to install the seal. So I don't know if you guys can see the part number on this one. I really love the Motion Pro products. This split seal driver is worth its weight in gold. I highly recommend getting one from them. The other tool that I have here that's a specialty tool, it comes from Progressive Suspension. And basically what this does is this helps us adjust our air gap on top of our fork once we fill our fluid. We'll explain a little bit more about that later on in the video. The other tool here that we have here that's really important is this dampening rod bleeding tool from Motion Pro. It's a 5-in-1. Now you can do the job without this tool. It's just going to be a lot more difficult. You're going to struggle to get the spring back down over the dampening rod in the final steps. But like I said, I've been a mechanic for years, and you know, there was a long time I didn't have one of these, so you can get around without it. Other than those 3, you're going to want a 19mm socket. Now, if you're going to use a socket on an air gun, make sure it's a 6-point. Do not use a 12-point. You'll mess up the top of your cap. You're going to need a 14mm Allen. You're going to need a ratchet. You're going to need, on this case, because we have bleeders on top of our forks, a 6mm open-end wrench. You're going to want a nice flat blade screwdriver, something that's got a good fine tip on it. And if you're lucky enough, you can use an air gun. Now, most of this video, we are going to try to stay away from using an air gun because we're going to assume that most of you at home don't have access to one. So our first step is going to be to go ahead and drain the forks. On our set of forks here, we have a set of bleeder valves. Now I'm going to go ahead and say, before you do anything, you should get these bad boys out of the way. You hit them with a socket or anything, it's a big risk of breaking them off in the cap, and then it's a pain in the ass to deal with after that. So go ahead and do yourself a favor. If you have bleeder valves like these forks do, go ahead and pull them off before you start anything. Beware, once you pull them off, oil will come back out of that hole. And now that our bleeder valves are out of the way, our next move that we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and pull off the top caps using a 19mm wrench. There are multiple ways to go about removing these caps. The easiest way is if you have an air gun and a 19mm socket. Now if you're going to use an air gun and socket, make sure that you use a 6-point socket, not a 12-point. It'll lessen the damage to your cap. We're going to go ahead and assume that most of you at home don't have an air gun. So the alternative way that I would do this without an air gun is I would use a wrench and a buddy's help to get on there and break it loose. Or if I have some caps that are really stuck, I'll put them back in the bike. I'll tighten down the triple clamp and actually use the triple clamp to help hold the fork while I loosen the cap. Once we have our caps loose, just go ahead and dump the oil out, get out as much as we can. Keep in mind, you're not going to get all of the oil out. Okay, so I've drained as much oil as I could out of the top. Now it's on to our next step. I'm going to go ahead and lightly rethread the top of the cap, and this is only so that way it doesn't puke out the top and make a mess everywhere. The next step is going to be, we're going to pull that rubber plug. I don't know if you guys can see that out of the bottom of the fork, and there is a 14mm Allen that we are going to remove. There will be oil inside of this chamber, so be ready to dump it. All right, using a screwdriver, we're going to stick it in the side here. We're going to go ahead and pry that rubber plug on out. Bite. Just like that. All right, we're going to take our 14mm socket. We're going to place it in the bottom. Now again, if you have an air gun, that is going to be the easiest way of getting this bad boy out. Make sure that you are going in the counterclockwise direction. They are very easy to strip out. It's very easy to damage. But we're going to pretend like we're most of you guys at home, don't have the tools of the air gun. So we're going to go ahead and get our tool out here and give it a good smack. As you can tell, somebody at some point really hit this fork, broke a good chunk out of it, but lucky for us, it's broken above the point where the O-ring seals, so shouldn't cause us any problems, should go together just fine. So the next step from here is going to be to go ahead and pull out the inner cartridge. Now keep in mind, when you pull this bad boy out of there, it is going to be covered in oil, it'll be dirty. So go ahead, if you haven't already, set yourself up a spot with some rags. That way you have somewhere to lay it when you pull it out, and you can kind of eliminate the mess traveling. Next, using a flat blade screwdriver, we're going to go ahead and pry the dust seal back. Now when you do this, be extra careful not to scratch this inner tube, because if you scratch this tube, it will never seal again. You'll have to replace it. It's really expensive, so do anything you can to keep from damaging this tube. After the dust seal is up and out of the way, the next thing we have to do is remove the retaining ring for the oil seal. You're going to use the same flathead screwdriver for that, and it's very simple. You're going to get in there, and you're going to find a little spot where you can grab it, and you're going to simply pry it up. Again, being very careful not to scratch this inner tube. For the fun part, you have the dust seal out, you have your retaining ring out. You got to separate the tubes now. To do that, all you're very simply going to do is you're going to take the two tubes, push them together, and grip the lower tube firmly, and you're going to slide, just like that. And bam, they should come right apart. And now you can get to your seals, your bushings, so on and so forth. These are the two bushings that we talked about earlier that are so vital and keep the tolerances between the two tubes. Now our customer is going to be real happy that we decided to go ahead and recommend and get those. I don't know if it shows up in the camera here, but you can see on the edges of this where the coating is starting to come off of the bushings, meaning that these bad boys are worn. Now they're probably not totally worn out, but they definitely have a lot of love on them. So to get them off, we're going to go ahead and take our flat blade screwdriver. We're going to stick it into the slot, pry it apart, and slip that back off. We're going to slide this one off. And we're going to slide the washer off. And then we're going to take our seal and grab that bad boy. And we're going to go ahead and pull that off. And then we're going to grab our retaining ring and dust seal, slide those to the end, and pull those off as well. And the next step is to go ahead and clean both this inner and the outer tube. So let's talk about how we're going to clean our tubes here for a second. Now here, I have the luxury of having a parts cleaner. A lot of you guys at home are not going to have a parts cleaner. So the best way to really clean these up is to use either brake clean or carburetor cleaner. I personally prefer brake cleaner over carburetor cleaner. and that is because it's meant to go on your brakes. This will actually dry and leave nothing behind, no film, anything. Whereas with the carburetor cleaner, typically it'll leave you a residue behind. So I really recommend brake clean, but you can use carburetor clean as well. Whoops, try not to do that. So we've got our inner and outer tubes cleaned up. Now it's time for us to get our seals and bushings put back onto our inner fork tube. One little trick for you guys at home is a lot of you guys aren't going to have what's called a fork seal driver bullet, which is meant to put the seal on without damaging it. An old school trick for you is go ahead and grab the Ziploc bag and you rip the bottom off of the Ziploc bag. Bam, just like that, so that way the little seal deal's gone. And you slide this over top of your fork. Now, what's this gonna do? This is gonna make it so that way when you put your seal on, it's gonna make it much harder to nick your seal moving past these two grooves in the top of the fork where your bushing goes. Now in each one of these bags you will have 2 of each, and 2 of these bad boys will be dust seals, 2 of them will be oil seals. The main difference is that the dust seals will have kind of a raised part to them. They're going to be the ones that go onto your fork tube first. After that, you'll be putting on your fluid seal. Now, when you are installing these, it is very important that you put them on in the correct way. And what I mean by that is as far as the dust seal, it's pretty hard to put that on wrong. It's got a lip, it sits down into the fork. But when it comes to the oil seal, I have seen it where guys have put this bad boy in backwards. And if you put this in backwards, it's not going to seal. So one easy way to tell if you have it on the right way or the wrong way is if you look inside of this seal, there's almost like 2 ramps, right? You want the ramp essentially facing towards the oil, which means basically that lifted edge inside of here should go towards the fluid that you're trying to seal. So I'm going to spray the Ziploc bag with a little bit of lube just to make it easier. I'm using WD-40. You can also use fork oil and so forth. I'm going to go ahead and take my dust seal first, keeping in mind that on the other end of this down this way is the end of the fork, right? So we're going to go ahead and take our spring side here because this is going to go and sit inside of our outer tube, right? So it's going to go on this way. So we're going to go ahead and take that bad boy. We're going to put it on there, being very careful not to force it, not to nick the seal. When you get down to this little step, you'll find it'll be a little difficult. I like to roll them a little bit, and sometimes you got to give them a little pressure in weird ways to get them to kind of pop up and over that lip, just like that. And you can go ahead and slide that seal on. Now, one of the things you can do is look for tears in the bag after you've put the seal on. If you cut this bag, you may have cut your seal. If there are no holes in this bag, you did not cut your seal. So we've got our dust seal on. I'm going to go ahead and grab my retaining clip right here. I'm going to go ahead and slide that bad boy on. Doesn't matter which way it goes. That one does not have a direction. And then this is the part where you need to be the most careful. This is the fluid seal. This is the one you absolutely do not want to damage. Again, like I said, I'm going to look at this seal. I'm going to identify the 2 ramps, and I'm going to make sure that the highest point in that ramp is going towards the oil, which would mean that this seal is going to go on with the spring going down like so. All right, just like that. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and unpack our bushings. Again, same as our seals. You'll have 2 per package, 2 upper and 2 lower. A lot of times when these things get shipped, here's a good example. You can see how this one is kind of bent and out around. Now this will cause you some issues if you try to put it straight on there. So you can just kind of give it a light bend and reform it, get it into as close of a circle as you possibly can. And just take a minute and take a look at those bushings and remember the wear we had on our other ones. You can see the difference between a good set of bushings and a set that are really worn. All right, next thing we're going to do is we're going to put on our washer first. And what this does is it basically makes it so that way when that fork is working, that bushing can't go in and cut the shit out of that seal, right? So we're going to put our washer on first. Then we are going to take the bigger of the 2 bushings. And when I say the bigger, if you look at them, you can put them right together. And you can obviously tell one is thicker and bigger than the other one. The bigger diameter bushing goes on first. These are not directional. And then comes your smaller one. Your smaller one's not going to go on as easy. You're going to have to stretch it a little bit. So what I like to do is I put it there at the bottom. Try not to stretch it more than you have to. Just enough to get it on there. Slide it in until it locks in place just like that. All right, now we're going to go ahead and join our 2 tubes back together. I'm going to slide that one in, making sure that that bushing stays in place as the fork tube goes down. We're going to drop the other bushing there. We're going to put our washer down. Now, I'm going to put the retaining clip and the dust seal up top like that so they kind of hold each other. And I'm going to go ahead and get our dust seal down as far as we can. We're going to take our fork seal driver tool here. The one that I'm using is from Motion Pro. It's 47 millimeter. We're going to go ahead and snap that bad boy on. And we are simply going to drive our seal in place. Now, hit it down until you can see the groove where the retaining clip goes down. There's no reason to force it any lower than that. You only need to go to where you can gain access to that groove, right? So once you've got your seal down, go ahead and grab your retaining clip up here and push it back down past your dust seal. And we're gonna just work that bad boy in there. Just like that. Grab our little screwdriver. Now when you push down on this, you should hear a little click. And that'll tell you that it's seated correctly. Next, we're gonna push down our dust seal. Now the dust seal, sometimes you need to use the driver to kind of fudge it on there. Most of the time, you can take your fingers and push it down just like that. All right, and as you can see, we have our dust seal and everything in place, and we're now ready to reassemble our cartridge. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to install this cartridge back into the tube. I'm going to go ahead and screw the cap on here hand tight. It doesn't have to be all the way down, just down a little bit enough to where the two won't come apart. I'm going to go ahead and get a rag, set it down so I have something to set my fork on top of. Now when you look inside of here, you can see the threads from the inside of that dampening rod that you just put in. We have to get those threads to line up with these threads in order to tighten it down. A lot of times the inner cartridge will have a tendency to want to spin on you as you're tightening it down. One of the things you can do to help you out with this, put my rag down here, is you can hold some pressure down on the fork tube. And what that'll do is it stops that from rotating inside. All right, now I've got my cap back in there. I have fully tightened it all the way down because I don't intend to mess with it anymore from here. Next step is to go ahead and fill this bad boy with oil. Now you do have a set of these forks. Repeat the same process as you did for this fork for the other one. And then all you gotta do is fill these bad boys up and you're ready to rock. Before we move on to refilling our forks, let's take a minute and let's talk about the different ways that you can measure the capacity of fluid that needs to go back into your forks. The most traditional way of doing this is going to be via a ratio right or a graduated cylinder, and you're going to go into the manual for your bike and it'll typically tell you in there a number like 12.4 fluid ounces, and you're going to fill this bad boy with 12.4 fluid ounces and simply pour it in the top of the fork and pump her up. This is really good for the weekend warrior. If you are out there racing, this is not going to be the method that you want to do. You're going to want to do something a little bit more precise, which brings me to the second method and the method that we're going to use today, which is measuring the gap. And when I'm talking about gap, what I'm talking about is when you take the spring out and the cap off of the fork, you collapse the fork all the way down on itself. You're going to essentially measure from the top of that fork tube to the top of your fork oil. And in this case, Racetech calls for 90 millimeters for a 2000 CR500. Now, there's a couple different ways you can measure this. If you're fortunate enough to have the tool, you can buy one of these nifty bad boys from Progressive Suspension, and it's got a little dial on here. You can slide this, you measure out your 90 millimeters, you lock it down, and then you go ahead and draw all the residual fluid out until you get your desired height. The other way you can do this if you're not fortunate enough to have one of these tools is you can take a coat hanger and cut it out so you get a straight section. Measure the 90 millimeters and essentially put a bend on it, right? And what you're gonna do is you use it like a dipstick. You fill up the oil and then you drop your dipstick in there until you see the oil just barely touch the bottom of it. And that'll help you set your fork height if you don't have one of these nifty tools. We're gonna go ahead and show you how to set up the forks today by gap. But like I said, don't be afraid to go ahead and do it with a ratio right. If you do it with a ratio right, I highly suggest that if the manual calls for 12.4 fluid ounces, you put in just a little bit under 12.4 fluid ounces to make up for that residual oil that's still left in those forks. All right, so one tool I forgot to mention earlier that we are going to use for this procedure is going to be this adjustable wrench here. We're going to simply use that so that way we can grab onto this in here and stop it from spinning. We're going to then take our 19, we're going to place it on our cap, and we're going to break it loose. Just like that. And then we are going to remove our cap. Keep in mind this spring will be under some pressure, so it'll want to pop up on you. Don't be alarmed, it's not that much pressure. It's not like it's going to go shooting across the room like it will on some of the bigger bikes like the Harleys and stuff like that. So we're going to go ahead and at this point we're going to let our dampening rod fall down. And we're going to lift our spring out and set that aside. So I don't know if some of you noticed, but this little bad boy kind of fell out on me while I was taking that spring out. And all this is just simply a rod that goes into the center there. It's not a big deal. Just watch for that when you're doing it. But essentially, this is what you're going to be left with. As you can see, I have my fork all the way bottomed out, as low compressed as I can. And when you look in here, you can now see that the rod's down, there's no spring. So now I'm going to begin to fill this up. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill it up until about where I think I'm within my range for my 90 millimeters. And then I'm going to take my tool and measure it out. So we've now added some oil to our fork. Next thing we're going to do is take our dampening rod tool and we're going to go ahead and bleed and prime our dampening rod. I'm going to go ahead and pull the outer case up a little bit so that way oil doesn't shoot out the side and I don't lose any oil. And I'm going to simply take this and I'm going to pump it up and down. Ooh. See what I'm saying about when you come up a little too high, it'll shoot on you, so be careful. Now I'm going to drop this back down, take my tool off because now my dampening rod's bled, and now I'm going to do my final fill and check my level of my fluid. I'm going to go ahead and grab my tool. I have set this distance right here at 90 millimeters in height. And then I'm going to simply insert the tool in, hit the edge of the top of that fork, and pull the residual fluid out. So you can hear that my cylinder is sucking air, which means I'm now perfectly at 90 millimeters. All right, now that our gap is set, we're ready for our final assembly. Like I said before, I have this nifty little tool, so I'm going to go ahead and use it. You can do this without the tool. It is just a lot more difficulty. You may find yourself having to get some screwdrivers and work the dampening rod up in between the spring. It is a real pain. So I really recommend buying this Motion Pro tool. It's a 5-in-1 tool, so it'll more than likely fit any bike that you have or are going to buy in the future, and it makes life so much easier. We're going to go ahead and take our spring. We're going to slide our spring over. And then we're going to go ahead and take our washer that goes on top of our spring. We're going to pop that on. We're going to go ahead and pick up on our outer case, because when we pull this dampening rod up, it's going to want to squirt oil. And we're going to go ahead and pull this bad boy up. Okay, once that dampening rod is all the way up, this outer tube doesn't have to remain up. I would go ahead and I have my cap ready, and I push down on the spring, and I can actually hold the dampening rod with my 2 fingers, unscrew that, and start screwing my cap on. Once I have my cap started, I'll go ahead and grab my wrench here. I'll go ahead and get her tightened down. And go ahead and give her a nice snug, get her nice and tight. All right, I got my fork cap back on. I've got my fluid. Everything is all done. Last but not least, I'm going to reinstall our aftermarket fork bleeder. And remember, do not over tighten these. They break very easily. So, you know, just make sure you snug her up real nice, and that's it. It doesn't need a whole bunch of pressure. You go He-Man in this bad boy on, and you're going to ask for a world of trouble. But, all right, guys, that about sums up our video on how to rebuild 2000 CR500 forks. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask them below in the comments section. If you like what you saw today, show us some support and go ahead and click that subscribe button so we can keep these videos coming for you.